Welcome back. In this lecture, we travel to one of my favorite moments in human history. The moment humans looked at the world and said, "What if we can explain nature without invoking gods?" This shift is so enormous that many historians consider it the true birth of science. Not because the Greeks had labs or microscopes, they didn't, but because they did something psychologically revolutionary. They decided that nature follows rules and not moods of divine beings. This is where biology, astrobiology, began, and honestly, this is where thinking itself becomes scientific. So imagine being alive 600 BC. No microscope, no telescope, no chemistry, no physics. If lightning strikes, it's Zeus. If the Nile floods, it's divine order. If illness spreads, it's the punishment from gods. And suddenly, in one small corner of Ionia, modern day Turkey, people start saying things like, what if lightning is just electricity? What if life comes from water? And what if the universe is made of particles we can't see? Greek natural philosophy is the moment humans challenge supernatural explanation with logic, inference, observation, and daring imagination. So let's go through it. First, we're going to talk about Anaxagoras, which is really interesting because he was the first to talk about this concept of panspermia. So, panspermia is the idea that life is traveling between planets as a seed, and we can't know its origin in that sense. And he was first to talk about it. And later, we went to Thales, the man Aristotle later called the first philosopher. So Thales is an interesting type. He was a strange combination of philosopher, engineer, geometer, and according to one story, a terrible businessman. But later he predicted a good olive harvest and bought every olive press in the region to make a fortune. He was also the first person to know of to say life originates from water. Why he said that? Well, he observed that all living things need moisture. Seed contain moisture. Ancient fossils of marine organisms are found on inland. The Nile flooding brings fertility. And the explanation had something radical: zero gods, zero myth, 100% natural mechanism. For the first time in history, life was explained by nature shaping nature. No supernatural mechanisms involved. The simple idea, as it sounds, it's the foundation of the origin of life research we do today. And later there is one of the pre-Socrates that I really admire, Anaximander. He was a student of Thales, but like every good student, he didn't just repeat his teacher, he pushed further. He proposed that life began in the sea and humans evolved from fish like creatures. Think about that. This is 2,400 years before Darwin. And why did he think that? Because human babies are helpless. A human infant cannot survive on its own for years. So Anaximander thought if early humans were like this, they would have died out. So maybe humans originate from something more self-sufficient, perhaps a fish-like animals that later adapted to land. He also saw how the water rises and goes back, and think about there was a time before where all the earth was in water. This is essentially the first documented evolutionary argument. So, in a fun fact, in Samos, archaeologists found ancient fossils near beaches that might have inspired such ideas. People back then didn't understand fossils. but they noticed that some stones look like fish or shells. So Anaximander had really strong background to put this idea out. And later there's Anaximenes. So he chooses air instead of water. Why? Because he observes breathing. In Greek thought, breath and soul were the same word, pneuma. He noticed that air changes when compressed or expanded. Compressed air becomes cold or dense, and expanded air becomes warm or thin. He proposed that natural mechanism where air condenses and rarefies to create everything in the universe. This is the first attempt to connect physical process to biological processes, actually. Today, when we talk about atmospheric chemistry shaping your life, we are echoing Anaximenes without even realizing it. And then we come to Heraclitus. Sorry. Everything flows. If you were to have a philosophical dinner with a Greek thinker, Heraclitus would be the one, the intense one, chain smoking in the corner, staring into the fire and saying cryptic things. His core idea is everything flows. Pante rei. Life for Heraclitus was not a static, it was a flux. Nothing stays the same, everything changes. Biologically, this is profound because evolution is a change, development is a change, metabolism is a constant flux. So, Heraclitus understood dynamic systems long before thermodynamics or evolutionary biology existed. He was also nicknamed the Obscure because nobody could understand his writing. But ironically, he was the one of the most accurate early thinkers about nature. Then we move to Empedocles, the elements and early evolution concepts. It's one of the most imaginative thinkers of antiquity. He proposes that the world is made of four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. But what's fascinating for us is his proto evolutionary idea. He thought early organisms formed as random combinations of parts. Imagine arms without bodies, heads without necks, sound bizarre, but he believed that only the combinations that worked survived. This is one of the earliest ideas resembling natural selection. It's astonishing how close some of these intuitions were to modern biology. And Empedocles also claimed he. So this is very interesting story about how he died. If you don't know, he claimed he was a god and once jumped into the Etna volcano to prove it. The volcano in the stories that spit out one of his bronze sandals out, and he died by jumping into a volcano. So also he had talk about the forces, love and strife, the repulsion and attraction, where basically all the quantum, molecular systems, and even physics and chemistry of magnetism works, which was really interesting. Let's follow him with Democritus. This is one of my favorite personal favorites. Sorry. He argued that the entire universe, including life, is made of tiny, indivisible particles. So, atoms. He also believed life does not require a vital force. The universe contains infinite worlds. Some worlds have life and some don't. Some have suns and some don't. This is over 2000 years before the Drake equation. Democritus essentially predicted exoplanets, cosmic plurality. So his ideas were so ahead of their time, it took 2 millennia to physics to catch up. And later, we're gonna see his student, Methodius of Chios, which is really important for astrobiology. It displays the early astrobiology. So, Metrodorus, a student of Democritus, gave one of my favorite quotes in ancient philosophy. To think Earth is the only world with life is as absurd as believing that in whole field of millet only one seed will grow. This is pure astrobiology. The probabilistic argument, 4th century BC, using analogy of one of the strongest tools in Greek reasoning, he defends the idea of cosmic life. If you ever need a proof that astrobiology began as a philosophical idea, Metrodorus is it. And then we came to the father, Aristotle. So with him, the systematic biology begins. No Greek thinker influenced biology more than Aristotle. So he was the first systematic biologist, a meticulous observer. He was the founder of zoology, and ironically, also the one responsible for some ideas that slowed biology for centuries. We're gonna delve deep into the spontaneous generation. He dissected animals, classified them, and described embryology and tried to understand life through observation. Something no one before him did with such organization, but he also believed, as I mentioned before, the spontaneous generation and theology, nature acts for a purpose, the hierarchy of souls. Still, Aristotle represents the first attempt to build a coherent biological framework. So, maybe if you don't know, there's a fact about Aristotle I can give. Maybe we should call them fun fact or something like that, I don't know. That Aristotle spent years on the island of Lesbos studying marine life, and some of his descriptions of octopus behavior are accurate by even modern standards. We are still using them. But the Greek tradition didn't end with Greece. In Islamic Golden Age, people like Avicenna and Averroes comes up, and these are during the Islamic Golden Age, so the 8th and 12th centuries. They preserved, expanded, and corrected Greek science. They proposed cosmic organization, natural laws, medical and biological mechanisms based on observations. Their translations later reached Europe and fueled the Renaissance. So the story of astrobiology also runs through Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo. Well, because the astrobiology asks the essential questions, you can imagine that all Homo sapiens would need answer to these. So why this matters for astrobiology and significance for origin of life as well? Every idea we cover today contributed to something essential. For example, the Thales naturalistic explanations and Anaximander and Empedocles mentioned the early evolution ideas. Democritus introduced atoms and infinite worlds. Aristotle talked about classification and observation. Islamic philosophers introduced rational analysis of the nature. They all combine here. So astrobiology begins here, not in a lab, not in modern observatory, but in the minds of people trying to understand life using reason instead of myth. This mindset is what makes science possible. So, in the next lecture, we will move into the scientific revolution. People like Descartes, Galileo, Newton, and we're gonna start seeing the fall of spontaneous generation idea. We will see how biology becomes mechanistic, how life becomes a chemistry, and how the first real debates about origins of life began. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in lecture 3.